Now we're ready to start looking at the actual bead crochet process. And you may notice I'm actually starting in the middle here, which might seem a little bit odd, but there's a very good reason that I'm doing that. And that is that it is super hard to do the beginning of a bead crochet tube if you don't know where the process is heading. So we're going to start here, and in the next video I'll actually show you how to do the very beginning. Here's the actual pattern that you're going to be stringing, and it really could not be any easier. It's 5 colors of your choice over and over and over again in sequence. And when you've crocheted it for a while, you will end up with a tube that looks like this. And there are a couple of things that I'd like you to notice about this tube. And the first is that up here at the top, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 beads. And the 5 beads at the top tell us that this is a circumference 5 bracelet or a 5 around bracelet. And for this pattern, that goes along with the 5 colors. This is what the top of the bracelet will always look like. The particular colors may be different, but it will always be 5 beads like that. And the other thing to notice is that those beads on the top, they are in a different orientation than all of these beads below them. Right, so here you can see the holes of the beads, they're pointing up and down along the length of the tube. But the 5 beads on the top are sitting on their sides, kind of like in the position of car tires. And credit where credit is due, I owe that metaphor to Ann Benson of Beads East, who also has some really nice bead tutorials with some very clear animations. So those are also a good source for these techniques. So I'm going to bring the crochet hook over. And tighten this loop of yarn to get ready to start crocheting. It was expanded just because I'd stopped crocheting for a while. And now, just taking a look at what's going on here, this red bead just to the right of the crochet hook, so towards my dominant hand, is the last bead that was crocheted on. The next bead we're going to crochet into is that purple bead. And this pattern is color-coded so that when we stick our crochet hook into a purple bead, we are bringing down another purple bead. The colors always match. So that's part of what makes this really easy to work with. Okay, so the first step, I'm going to take the crochet hook and I'm going to stick it right under that purple bead, just underneath the yarn that's holding the bead. And then, and this is absolutely critical, every stitch you're going to take your finger and push the bead back behind the crochet hook. And if you look closely, you'll see what that's done is that's taken that purple bead from the car tire position and pushed it flat to match the other beads in the tube and continue that purple spiral. Okay, so far so good. Now, the yarn that's going towards the beads, this is known as the working yarn, you'll see it's hanging out between the 2 loops of yarn that are now on the hook. And you want to make sure that it's just kind of hanging between them. Do not get it caught around other beads or anything else, right? So it's just kind of hanging out there. We're going to pull the new purple bead down, and then we're going to wrap the yarn around the crochet hook from back to front, which is how you always wrap in crochet. And we'll use the hook to pull that new yarn through the 2 loops that were on the hook. And so now we've completed our first stitch. That is a bead crochet slip stitch. And you'll recognize that it's a slip stitch if you do crochet. And now if we look closely at what's happened here, we've got our new purple bead on its side. There's the old purple bead that's flat, and we've completed 1 stitch with 1 new bead attached. And so we're now ready to do the next stitch, which is going to be into the blue bead that is just to the left of the hook. So once again, I'm going to stick the crochet hook under. And you'll notice that time, I actually kind of knocked the bead back just by sticking it under. When you get more adept with this, that may happen. You might do it in 1 stroke, but if not, you just push it back as before to get that blue bead in place flat like it's supposed to be. And now if we've done this right, the next bead we're pulling down should be blue, and yay, it is. So that's always a good sign. So our yarn is hanging out between the 2 loops that are on the crochet hook. We pull the blue bead down, we wrap the yarn around the crochet hook back to front, and we pull it through. And I will point out, you can pull it through 1 loop and then separately through the next loop. You might find that more comfortable when you're starting out, and it's perfectly fine. It's a little bit slower, but it makes exactly the same stitch. So let me just go ahead and stitch a few more here. And I will point out, this is bead crochet slip stitch. There is another method that uses single crochet that I will not be showing you here. Okay, so here we are, orange bead, back behind the hook, bring the new orange bead down, yarn is hanging out between the 2 loops on the hook, wrap the yarn back to front, try not to have it slip, and then pull it through both loops, And now if we just stitch on one more bead, the red bead here, we'll be back to where we started in the 5-color pattern. So once this is on, the top of the bracelet now looks exactly like it did when we started, but we're 1 row up. Now if you want to stop crocheting for a while, you can just expand the loop around the crochet hook like so, and then set this aside. And with these big beads and this big yarn, which is, you know, fairly full of friction, that's good enough, unless you're going to be carrying it and it's going to jostle a lot. But if you're going to be working with small seed beads and thread, which is much smoother, you might want to go as far as to pin the loop of thread. You can use a safety pin for this. Just what you want to be careful not to do is to use one of those metal safety pins with a little loop at the bottom, because the thread can catch on that. But they make loopless ones, and this is a little removable stitch marker for knitting, which works quite well. So now let's take a closer look at this seed bead tube so that I can show you the process here. It will be a lot harder to see, but I just want to show you that it really is exactly the same. The holes of these beads in the tube are pointing up and down, and once again the beads on the top are sitting on their sides in the card tire position, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, just like before, one of each color. So the other thing that I want to show you in this process, up until now, and this is probably how you'll start, as we've been making each stitch, I've been feeding the beads one at a time, right? So like I'm making the stitch with the purple bead, I slide the purple bead down, and then I make the stitch. That's very slow. So when you're more comfortable, what you're going to do is you'll take a bunch of beads like this, and you'll slide them all up near the crochet hook and hold them in your non-dominant hand, for me that's the left hand, between where you anchor the yarn for tension. For me personally, I do it between my 4th and 5th fingers, but different people do different things, and the crochet hook. And then you can use your thumb and forefinger and just slide the beads down one at a time, which is much more efficient. Okay, so now, same process as before. We just stitched into the red bead, and we're about to go into purple. So hook goes under the purple bead gets pushed back, and you can see it is now flat and matching the rest of the purple spiral. We push the next purple bead down, we wrap the yarn back to front, and we pull it through both loops, which is really hard to show you at this size. And so I'll keep going here. I will mention that here we were sliding the beads towards the crochet hook. Periodically, you'll have to go the other way. You're going to run out of room on the thread to make more stitches, and so you'll have to take all the beads and slide them down away from the bracelet. Bead management is just something that you get used to as you do this. Right? Okay, so let's show this a little bit more detail, right? Orange goes back. There the thread is hanging in between the 2 loops on the hook. The next orange bead goes down. We wrap the yarn, and we pull it through both loops, and you can see it didn't quite make it through both. So one and then the other, totally fine. And now we're going into the red bead, and we make that stitch, and once again we're back to where we started. Right? So the top looks exactly like it did before, but we're 1 row up. Now, what I will point out about this is that this, as tricky as it is way easier than crocheting at the beginning when you don't have a tube, because when you don't have a tube yet, you've just got this tiny little bunch of beads to hold on to at the bottom. So it's much, much harder to make the stitches there. So if you happen to know someone who bead crochets, beg them, absolutely beg them, to make you stubs, the beginnings of tubes, so that you can start at this stage. It's much easier. But if you don't have that luxury, start with the big beads, and in the next video I'll show you how to start on your own.